Despite all the new faces around the Washington Commanders roster these days, Sam Fortier of the Washington Post says it was safety defensive back Quan Martin who stood out the most following mandatory minicamp. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, free and available. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are hearing this podcast. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com, a part of Sports Illustrated. And I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. Greatly appreciate you for coming through today and every dayers. I appreciate you for coming through every single day. On today's episode, the Washington Post Commanders beat reporter Sam Fortier is here. We're going to have a little bit of fun here at the end, play a little bit of game, get a little bit of silly because it is the dead period of the NFL season. But we're also going to talk about the serious side of mini camps and team development as well, all starting with a vibe check. How much is the good vibe around the Washington Commanders really worth this time of year? And Sam is going to tell us about the player who stood out the most to him so far. If you want to discuss this episode, any other episode, or anything Washington Commanders related with me, you can text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Just go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Become an insider today. And from there, you can text me your thoughts, your questions. I will text you my thoughts and observations, news, analysis, links, and all kinds of inside information, special content to insiders. No hashtags, no apps, no filters, just your phone, my phone. We text each other, have a good time. Again, joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders to do that today. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Quan Martin, second-year defensive back, safety for the Washington Commanders, is the guy who has caught Sam Fortier's eye this offseason. Before we get to that, though, Sam is going to tell us what all the good vibes in Washington really mean to him.
Harrison, that's a good question. But to me, I mean, vibe changes, vibe shifts. I'm old enough to remember when Ron Rivera got hired and people were talking about how he was going to be serious, unlike Jay Gruden, and he was going to hire the right people and, not be like Bill Callahan. And to me, vibe shifts, culture, blah, 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 blah. It's is Jayden a good quarterback and can he help them win more?
Yeah.
I know that doesn't help us fill airtime and column inches in June, but man, I gotta keep it real with you. It's just Is Jayden good? And to me, I'm a beat writer who's paid to cover this team. I think it's impossible to tell in minicamp when you're throwing routes on air and you're going against your own defense if he is the guy. And obviously, it's well documented how difficult it is to project quarterbacks from college to the NFL. I would say, the headline, right? He comes in at 545. That's important. He is working hard. He is doing the things to put himself in a position to succeed. But when the pads come on, when he's facing someone that's not him, is the offensive line going to hold up? Is he able to be himself? And if he is fully himself, will that be good enough to lead an NFL team? It's a little nihilistic that I'm talking about this right now, man. But I just don't think we know.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's great. And I say this a lot to my listeners, right? It's grain of salt. There's a lot of grains of salt that have to be taken with everything that we're talking about here. So everything we're talking about during this period, it's in the context of what we know today. What we know today, like you just mentioned, really is not a lot, right? And I go back to we'll talk about the Washington Wizards. I mean, when Wes Unseld Jr. got hired to be the head coach, he was going to be the guy that brought championship basketball back to DC, right? And then, just this last year, people couldn't wait to run him out. And we're talking about it being too late that they got rid of him. So, I mean, it crosses all kinds of sports. But from the little bit that we can see and the little bit that we can observe, because obviously we're out there watching snaps, we're watching these reps, who's a player that stood out to you? And again, you don't have to go as far to be this guy's going to be a Pro Bowler or anything like that, but just in the little bit of sample size that we do get to see, especially in the 11-on-11s, who's someone that maybe you weren't expecting to pop off the field a little bit that caught your attention this last week?
Quan Martin, the safety. Obviously, he had the highlight pick during camp, which I'm sure you've talked about on this show. And maybe you've talked about Quan in general. But I would say, I think we knew Jeremy Chin, considering that he turned down more money to go elsewhere. He's on a one-year deal. He talked about it being fit in this defense. I think everybody knew, okay, new faces on the defense that are going to pop are going to be Bobby Wagner and Jeremy Chin and Luvu with the money. But I thought to myself, like, oh, okay, if we're talking safeties, they have three young ones in Percy Butler, Defoe, and Quan. And I think Quan is very clearly the leader in the clubhouse there to like have a significant role. And when Dan Quinn was asked, who really popped to you on defense, he said, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was Chin, Luvu, and Quan. And so to me, like, that's a huge boost for Quan Martin. And I just think that, like, he's going to be a guy they move around, and I think he's going to cause some havoc. And hopefully for his sake, they don't leave him one-on-one in the slot against Tyreek again.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's just nuts. I like what Quan has done as well. And we got to talk to Quan a little bit after one of the minicamp practices. And I remember he even mentioned, like, kind of getting a lot of reps at the free safety position, something he's kind of looked forward to and really wanted to take advantage of. So it's good to see them kind of, like you said, they have this plan, right, with what they're going to do there and with what they're going to do with him. And it's really starting to kind of work out and take shape. You can kind of see where the path is going. I think the opposite to a certain extent can be said about the offensive line, right? So flipping a little bit from the secondary to that unit, we've seen a lot of combinations. We've seen a lot of guys getting quote unquote first team reps, second team reps. Cornelius Lucas, we've seen him at right tackle, left tackle, right? Trent Scott's been in there with the quote unquote first team left as the first team left tackle. What do you think about this offensive line approach? We asked Dan Quinn right at the break, at the end of minicamp, like, do you have kind of projected date? He said he doesn't have like a date circled on the calendar to have his starting five. But then Nick Allegretti, like the day before, says once you get your starting five, you can really start getting in rhythm. So what do you think about this approach of, like, we're not rushing to get our starting five and we're giving as many reps as many guys as possible?
Given how the approach has worked here for the last 4 years in terms of offensive line combinations and success of that unit, I'm willing to, like, give them the benefit of the doubt for now. I mean, I think that anytime you have a cohesive plan that's backed up with data from, and I don't just mean like spreadsheet data. I mean like data from your lived experience where you're like, oh, I tried this at Texas Tech if you're Cliff, or I tried this in Atlanta if you're Dan. I'm open to that being the right answer. I think that clearly this unit has a talent deficiency, and that the Commanders are betting that they can elevate this unit and they can do things that put them in a better position to succeed, as opposed to last year when Eric Bieniemy just dropped back past and really put those guys in very difficult situations when you're talking about big deficits and not forcing defenses to respect the run at all. And I think run pass ratio is a conversation we'll probably have about Cliff at some point, but later on. But to me, if this is what you think it takes to figure out what the best combination of guys is, I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt until there's evidence to suggest otherwise.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I'll tell you, I've got this, I'm trying to be in the same mindset, right? I'm trying to have that same mindset. I think certainly right now in June, you can certainly adopt that mindset, but I've got this kind of nagging thing hanging in the back of my mind where just from knowing a little bit about what Bobby Johnson's history and coverage when he was with New York was, a lot of angst coming out of the Giants, training camp last year, how long it took them to solidify their starting five. And then Bobby Johnson himself not having the greatest reputation around New York for developing young talent. And they're talking about first round young talent, not third round young talent. So it's gonna be really interesting. And I'm hoping myself that I can stay patient, like you're talking about with this process, because they do deserve the benefit of the doubt. It's pretty clear I'm going to have to lean on Sam a little bit during training camp and get some patience from him about this offensive line orchestration and waiting for the starting five to be announced. But what about patience with the starting quarterback announcement? Sam says it's downright brilliant that Dan Quinn is withholding the starting quarterback job announcement until he absolutely has to. We'll get into that with Sam and more coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you by Game Time. And Game Time makes getting your tickets even faster and easier. And some of the prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to starting the event, whether it's sports, comedy, theater, music, whatever event you're looking to go to. Game Time has killer last minute deals that can save you up to 60% all in prices. So there's no surprises at checkout. views from your seat. So even if you've never been inside the building, you'll know what to expect when you get there. And their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying all your tickets. NBA season is over, but hockey is still going on. Baseball is in full swing. And of course, football is right around the corner. So take the guesswork out of buying all your tickets, whether it's NFL, baseball, sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever it is. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app again, create your account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen, your first view today and every day. Every day. Make sure you come back tomorrow. We'll continue on our week of Washington Commanders content. Plenty more to talk about here as we get through this dead period of the NFL calendar. In the meantime, make sure you're also checking out Locked On Sports today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories, can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, all streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sam Fortier, beat reporter, Commanders beat reporter for the Washington Post, here today, says it's a great move that Washington Commanders coach Dan Quinn is withholding the starting quarterback announcement as we continue our conversation with Sam.
To me, if you're a coach and you think to yourself, like, what sort of carrots and sticks do I have to motivate my players? If you have the carrot for Jayden to say, like, you're not the starter, you got to keep working hard, you got to maintain this 5:45 a.m. focus, you got to be steadfast and protect the team over the summer break, I want to get the best out of you. Mm-hmm. Why give up the leverage that you have there? To me, like, if I'm Dan Quinn, I'm doing the exact same thing, and I understand why it's frustrating to fans. It's frustrating to me as a reporter because it's like, bro, it's extremely obvious that you are going to name him quarterback one at some point. Like, why don't you just acknowledge that? And like, I think that if anybody thinks that this is a real competition with Marcus Mariota, is A, deluding themselves, and B, not watching, because like Jayden Daniels outperformed Marcus. So it's very obvious where this is going to go. But if I'm Dan Quinn, I'm like, I don't care. That doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is getting my quarterback to be as prepared as possible for week one, when, rookie quarterbacks have historically, CJ Stroud accepted, have had a tough time anyway. Like, get this dude to be as prepared as possible. And so to me, it's like, yeah, of course I would do that if I were Dan Quinn.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's a little bit of a different angle than I've heard, and I like that angle. I think you're spot on there, and I think that Coach Quinn is very smart for doing that as well. Talking about Jayden, you already kind of hit on Jayden a little bit, and again, in the context of what we've been able to really see and how much you can really evaluate at this point in the process, what do you think of him so far as that future QB1 for the Washington Commanders?
Everything that we saw on tape, everything we heard about is for real, right? Like, the dude can run. The dude has a very, an accurate arm. He has a good deep ball. I think that I have a different perspective than some people I know, like, went out to the field and were like, oh, this dude's like thicker than I thought. Maybe he can withstand some hits. I still think he's a thin guy. I think 6'4", 210, if he actually is 210, is still, like, that's a historic aberration in terms of frame. We're talking about 3 quarterbacks who were drafted in the first round in the last 15 years that look like him. RG3 being one of them. I think those comparisons are totally fair. But that's just not something that it's possible to ascertain. Like, is he going to stay healthy? Is he going to slide? Is he going to do those things? I think those are pressing questions that we can't answer yet. But when we talk about is Jayden Daniels like going to be the guy? I don't think we have enough. I mean, I feel like a broken record, and I feel bad, Harrison, because like you invited me on, and I want to give you some like takes. I want to give you some like good insight, but I feel like it's still just incomplete, man.
Yeah. No, that's totally fair. It's totally fair. Something else that we got to wait and see. We're going to find out, right? People are starting to kind of dim on the opinion that Terry McLaurin is like a number 1 receiver in the National Football League. People also starting to dim on like Jahan Dotson, being this first round pick wide receiver who could become an electric playmaker. Both of these guys have talked about they want to improve their yards after catch, which I think that, it's a totally different conversation for another time, but just the usage in the playbook and how they're running and what routes they're being asked to run and all these things are going to help with that. But also both these guys kind of have something to prove, right? Like Jahan Dotson's got a 5th-year option coming up next year. Terry McLaurin, as of right now, will be playing on an expiring contract next year. So this year, who has more pressure on them in your mind, career-wise, Terry McLaurin or Jahan Dotson?
Jahan without a question, because Jahan hasn't demonstrated he can do it at that level. I mean, Terry McLaurin, yeah, okay, like people can talk about him as like, oh, he's the 12th best receiver instead of the 6th best receiver in the league. But like Terry McLaurin has had 77 to 79 catches for more than 1,000 yards every year for the last 3 years. And everybody knows about the number of quarterbacks he's played with. So like to me, his consistency, especially when the scheme was not prioritizing him last year, and I would say even the yards after the catch thing, if you're in a West Coast offense, the yak, I mean, when you're in a West Coast offense with a young quarterback who holds the ball, like, yeah, I think Terry could improve his yak, but I would not say that his yak total last year was like entirely his fault. But Cliff Kingsbury's going to push the ball down the field. So I think that like, especially if Jayden starts throwing slot fades at the rate that he did in college, he's probably not going to get as much cover one as he saw in college just because of the way that NFL defenses play, right? But like Malik Neighbors told me once when I was at LSU's pro day, like if we got to the line and we saw one safety like over the top, like Jayden just looked at me, we audibled and we ran slot fade all day. And that was like the money ball for them. And so to me, I think there's going to be opportunities this season for Jahan Johnson to do that same sort of thing. And we know about his catch radius. We know about the contested catch. Like those were the things that were that Drew Terrell, the receivers coach, raved about him coming out. The question is does he have the strength to get off press? Does he have the hands, to kind of stay, to stay in his route at the line? I think those are the things that are going to be challenging for him. But just to me, like Jahan doesn't have the track record of Terry McLaurin to say like, hey, I can do this year in, year out. You're still in your rookie deal. You're trying to get paid in the way that Terry got paid. Like there's way more pressure on Jahan, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely correct there. Another unit that was bounced back to the defense, we kind of already talked about one member, Quan Martin, right? But the secondary, when you look at this secondary, there's a potential here that 3 of the 4 starting DBs, and again, you get into the 5 in the slot with Mike Sanders. So, but if you look at Benjamin St-Juste, Emmanuel Forbes, Quan Martin, and Jeremy Chin, if that's your projected starting 4 in a base package, 3 of those 4 guys were on this team last year.
Can I interject real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Michael Davis is going to be a starting outside corner.
And that was going to be kind of my question, right? So who do you think has, so you already kind of answered it, but who has the upper hand in that battle between Emmanuel Forbes and Michael Davis? And even if it's only 2 of the 4 returning, Quan Martin and Benjamin St-Juste, do you think that's enough to kind of reinstall some confidence in the secondary before you see them face truly live bolts in regular season? Like, can that 2 of 4 or 3 of 4, if Emmanuel does win that competition, can they regain your confidence through the preseason, or is it going to take regular season success for you to really kind of bounce back in your confidence of them?
It always takes regular season success, in my opinion. But I would say, like, to me, I know that they've been rotating a bunch of different dudes in, but like it just, and maybe Joe Witt Jr. is telling us the truth when he says there's going to be 18 guys rolling in. I just think it's hard to do that, especially in the secondary when communication is so important. I think you need guys out there for a lot of reps. Joe Witt this is not like a schematic review thing. We've never seen him call plays before, but like every interview he's given, every player you hear talk about him, he just seems like an aggressive guy. And I think that I'm not saying he's going to do Brian Flores blitz rates like he's doing up in Minnesota, but like, I think we're going to see a lot of press. I think we're going to see some blitzes. I think we're going to see like him turn the heat up on some people. And I just have if you're playing a lot of press man, I just have a hard time seeing Emmanuel Forbes being your type of guy on the outside, particularly in a division where, I remember those AJ Brown versus Emmanuel Forbes reps. Like it wasn't pretty. I think, will Emmanuel have a role in this defense is going to be one of my biggest questions throughout camp. I would say Michael Davis, who I covered, I think when he was a rookie in LA with the Chargers. I know he's not the same guy, but like I've always been impressed with him. I remember he took over for I think Trevor Williams halfway through his rookie year, and he is someone who I think is pretty good at press man, and I think he's like a smart corner. And so to me, I see him getting into this lineup. And maybe I'm like overweighting my priors or whatever, but like I see him getting into this lineup and being a part of the scheme. And so Emmanuel Forbes, to me, like, I got to see it. I have to see it in a regular season game against a legit receiver. And I acknowledge I don't think his coaching was as good as it could have been last year.
Right.
I think that Donatello is going to come in and do a better job coaching these guys up. But sorry, I feel like I've rambled a little bit, but I would just say, like, this DB group, I would expect better play from them, but I still don't know how Emmanuel fits in.
Like Sam says every day, as you remember, we talked about Emmanuel Forbes and his fit in this system stylistically, schematically. It's going to be really interesting to watch because not only in coverage is Emmanuel Forbes going to have to be able to win physically against some tougher receivers, but if you're blitzing 6 guys, maybe sometimes 7 guys, that means you're only leaving 4 or 5 guys in the back end of the defense to contain any plays that get past that pass rush. And if you're Emmanuel Forbes and that play is on your side of the ball, brother, you're not just going to be expected to contain. You're not just going to be expected to kick the play back inside. You are going to be expected to make the play, make a physical play. And that is a question that we all have for Emmanuel moving forward. We also got questions about the future of linebacker, defensive end, perhaps Jamin Davis. Sam Fortier weighing in on the conversion of Jamin Davis to an edge rusher. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, Sam Fortier, Washington Commanders beat reporter for the Washington Post, here with us on this episode. We just answered or tried to talk about some potential questions surrounding Emmanuel Forbes' future with the team. But we've also got questions about linebacker, maybe / defensive end Jamin Davis. Sam talking about that conversion of Jamin Davis from off-ball linebacker to pass rusher right now.
It is hard for me to say. Like, my gut reaction when you ask that is, well, it's not like linebacker has worked out perfectly, so you got to try something new. Yeah. But at the same time, I don't know if I'm totally sold on, like, Jamin Davis as an edge rusher. He's a freak athlete, man. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's got to be a way that you find for him to contribute. But I just, when you look at the size, when you look at the production, I think he's a good blitzer, but, like, Is he a real, like, edge rusher? I don't know. I don't see it. But again, like, I'm open if he adds, a little more weight, if he can keep the explosion, like, okay, maybe, yeah, like maybe in certain situations that he can be a situational pass rusher. But if the coaching staff is already viewing you as sort of maybe this is this guy's ceiling, I think that's, obviously a concern if you're Jamin.
Yeah, I'll tell you who's rooting for Jamin Davis to fail on that venture, and that's Micah Parsons' agent. Because if Jamin Davis can become Micah Parsons-esque, then Micah Parsons' value might take a little bit of a hit next time they come to the contract table. I want to ask you this. We're kind of like, now we're going to looking back at the entire experience over the last 5 months, 10 days as we talk today. How different is this organization from January 8th to now?
I mean,
for the audience, January 8th is the day they fired Ron Rivera.
I mean, it's like an incredible change, right? Like, yeah. You've overhauled the front office. You have basically a brand new coaching staff. You've turned over the roster, I would say, as much as any team in the NFL. I mean, this is an incredibly different organization with faces. But to me, like, I just remember Harrison, like, standing in that locker room after the season finale, and you look around and you think to yourself, okay, we're like, Ron Rivera threw the rock in here. He's got the be where your feet are thing up. Like, anytime, anywhere, anyone, or whatever the slogan that Dan Quinn has now, like, that could very easily be Ron Rivera. Like, it could be the exact same cycle if Jayden isn't the guy and if they don't win. I think the coaching staff is in a better place. I think the fact that Dan Snyder isn't the owner anymore is obviously the most important part of this. And I think you saw that in the offseason, right? Like, the number one indicator to me that this franchise was in a better place is that, like, Adam Peters didn't feel like he needed to fix everything in one offseason. He didn't feel pressure from ownership to make a reckless trade back up to get an offensive lineman. He didn't feel pressure to say, okay, the board says Johnny Newton's our guy, but we're actually going to take this offensive lineman because the fans are worried about that, or ownership is worried about that. Like, Adam Peters' vision could be wrong. I'm not saying he's like Schwami and it's all going to work out, but the fact that, like, he put his team in place and he is following his process. I think that like that should give you confidence that like the people who ostensibly like know what they're doing are being allowed to do that in their fullest, capacity so far.
No, I agree. I like the way that you put that too. I kind of reckon it to like you feel like there's a blueprint here, right? Like people aren't just reacting as things happen and as things come. There's a blueprint that's being followed, and that should give a lot of confidence. Even if we don't necessarily agree, whether it's fans, media, whoever, we don't necessarily agree with everything that's being done or not done. But I think that's a good point there too.
And if Micah Parsons blows past Cornelius Lucas for a big sack and like the offensive line is getting torched, it will be absolutely fair to criticize Adam for the way that he approached this. But it's just the fact that like he has a clear vision, he stuck to it, I think is like commendable for now. Yeah,
absolutely. Look, the process can be flawless. The results ultimately matter a lot, right? So we compliment the process, like you said, and we'll critique the results if we need to later on. Sam, I love having you on here, man. So it's the dead period of the NFL season, right? This is like it's like 40 days. It's the only 40 days we have to worry about all year long. Baseball reporters, basketball reporters, hockey reporters hate NFL reporters because of that fact alone. But because it's the dead period, I want to have a little bit of fun. I want to get a little bit weird here. So I got 2 games I want to play with you. And I'm going to play this with a lot of people this offseason or this next 40 days. The first one is kind of a mix between true or false, and truth or dare. So it's called true or how dare you. So basically, those are the 2 responses I would like you to use. I've got 3 statements I'm going to read. And basically, those are the 2 answers I would like you to respond with is true or how dare you. By all means, add context as much as you want here. I think I know the answer to the first one, so it'll be easy for you. First one, Jayden Daniels is the best quarterback on this team right now.
True. Like that is a very easy question to me because like if you had to roll with this, if you went into that locker room and you're like, all right, we got to go win a game tomorrow against whomever, like I think everybody in there is riding with Jayden, even though he doesn't have the most experience in the building and blah blah blah. Yeah,
no, I agree. All right, next one. The number 1 receiver on this team in 2026 is not on the roster currently.
How dare you? How dare you be talking about 2026 right now? I mean, like, respectfully, Harrison, who knows, man? Like, I hate to be Kyle Shanahan. Like, who knows if we'll be here tomorrow? But like, 2026 in NFL terms is eons.
It's generations away. I agree. Like I said, we're getting a little bit weird with this too. So I've got another future question for you as well. Jamin Davis is on this roster in 2025.
How dare you? I mean, I believe in this defensive staff. I think there's a lot of smart people in this defense. And so if there's a way to get the most out of Jamin Davis, I think they'll be able to do it. But like I said earlier, like it's you got to squint really hard to see the vision of Jamin Davis being like a real threat on this defense. Like if you told me, okay, like he went to free agency and some team that loved him before the draft was like, we can fix this guy and overpaid him, I'd be like, yeah, that makes so much sense. Whereas like they're going to have him in the building for a year. And if they're like, X, Y, and Z for these reasons, like we think Jamin's like maybe like a vet minimum guy. So I would say now, like the more that I talk about them, I'm like, how dare you?
I agree. Look, I've told my listeners all offseason, man, like I'm excited about the prospect. I think, the freak athlete thing and just the thought that he can just run forward and have to worry about that only potentially, at least in some circumstances, I think is very entertaining. But again, like you mentioned before, the process versus the result, it's hard to expect what the result is going to be. I can't go as far as say he's going to be a 9-sack guy, a 10-sack guy in this new role. It's just, you can't do that until you see it, right? So last game I want to play, and it's a variation of a game that a lot of people have played in their youth. So this is going to be most likely to happen, could happen, never going to happen. We'll give you 3 options. You got to pick, you got to categorize them. It's going to be fun. So most likely to happen, could happen, never going to happen.
Okay.
Here are your options. Dan Quinn wins Coach of the Year. Jayden Daniels, Offensive Rookie of the Year. Commanders win the NFC East.
Man. Commanders win the NFC East, never going to happen. In terms of this year, just because like I just think Philly is too far ahead. I know like there is a path. I shouldn't say never gonna happen. This is a tough one because like I think it's very
unlikely. Well, I'm also painting you into a corner here. So like context, everybody. Don't go around being like, Sam Fortier said that the Commanders are never going to win the end. It's like there's context here. He doesn't have a choice in these categories. So let's remember that when we're having fun with this part, right?
I think that like it's extremely unlikely because I think Philadelphia is very good. And I think that Dallas, despite, I think that they're definitely on the decline, but I think that they still have a lot of talent and they have a very good quarterback. So like, who obviously is incredible in the regular season. So I think you should always think of those two guys ahead of Washington, at least going into the season. But it's not impossible because obviously, having a last place schedule in the NFL is a huge boon. And anyone who makes the CJ Stroud compare, like, if Jayden is CJ Stroud, like that's cool. But like, Philly and Dallas are tougher than Jacksonville and Indianapolis. Let's get it straight here because like a lot of things had to go right for Houston. And so for that reason, I would say it's probably likelier that Jayden wins Offensive Rookie of the Year, even though I think that like Caleb has to be the prohibitive favorite because of like the supporting cast that he has. And I just think like he's extremely talented. But like I think that Dan Quinn can't win Coach of the Year unless the Commanders win a lot. And for the Commanders to win a lot, I think Jayden has to be like excellent. I think he has to be CJ Stroud level. And it's just like number one picks, like kind of like the Chase Young thing, right? Like when he won it, I think draft status matters in these conversations. And so if Caleb and Jayden are even, I think it's probably going to go to Caleb. And I just have a really hard time seeing the Bears being as bad as the Panthers were last year. And so like I think, CJ being historically good and Bryce being historically, bad for a number one pick, like it's just like that is a perfect storm of things that I think is really hard to replicate, especially in a tougher division, as I said. So if I had to rank them, I would say Jayden Offensive Rookie of the Year, Dan Quinn Coach of the Year, and the Commanders winning the NFC East.
Yeah, no, I agree with you fully. And yeah, I mean, the Bears obviously are better than Carolina Panthers because they had the 9th pick in the NFL draft, and the first was due to them. And the Bears certainly are not doing what the Carolina, but nobody's doing what the Carolina Panthers are doing, which is a great thing to say here in Washington these days. Sam Fortier, Washington Post, Commanders beat reporter. Appreciate you for coming on the show, brother.
Harrison, it's always great to talk ball with you, man. I appreciate it.
Once again, big thanks to Sam Fortier of the Washington Post, Washington Commanders beat reporter for the Washington Post, coming through here today. Hopefully you enjoyed that conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Coming up tomorrow, we'll have more Commanders content as we move through the week. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, just throw them in the YouTube comment section or text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to text me today. Also, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view today and every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. And until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.